Fisherman's Wharf is the most visited area in San Francisco. It's got shopping, famous locations, and a whole lot of tourists. Because so many people from out of town walk through the wharf, there's a whole ecosystem of performers dotting the streets to entertain them. And the most prominent performer is the world-famous Bushman. The Bushman is internationally famous. He's got his own Wikipedia page, a Yelp page, an IMDb page, 2 documentaries, and countless articles written about him. The biggest problem with all these sources is there's not one, but 2 Bushmen. They both claimed to be the real Bushmen, and they hated each other's guts. They would lie to everyone who interviewed them to make the other guy look bad, and every source written about them is tainted by falsehoods. It's incredibly common for articles about the Bushmen to begin with a retraction, because they only talked to one of them who lied. Something you should be asking yourself right about now is how a street performer became internationally famous, and it's all thanks to an article published in 1999 about an up-and-coming pair of buskers. The act consisted of 2 people who will be the main characters in this story. David Johnson assembled a bunch of sticks into something that looked like a bush, and when people walked by, he jumped out and scared them. Greg Jacobs' main job was to work the crowd that formed around the act and get them to pay up after a particularly good scare. His secondary job was to act as a bodyguard if anyone got too upset after getting scared. Both parts of the act were equally important, and they split the money 50-50 for this reason. 1999 wasn't the first time they performed this act. In fact, something like it had been happening for over 20 years. But this article garnered them unprecedented attention after it got nationally syndicated. Suddenly, the Bushman wasn't just another act on the street, he was an international celebrity.
Excuse me, sir. Are you the guy with the bush? Supposedly hiding behind bushes and sometimes frightening people a little bit?
After entering the national zeitgeist, the 2 bifurcated and became separate Bushmen. Their split makes this whole story so much harder to document because they basically lied to every source that wasn't this one. For instance, who was the original Bushman?
I'm David Johnson, the world-famous Bushman.
My name is Gregory Jacobs, a.k.a. the Bushman, Fisherman's Wharf.
I'm David Johnson, the world-famous Bushman for 30 years.
I'm the Bushman of San Francisco, your worst nightmare, a black man behind the bush, Gregory Jacobs.
I'm David Johnson, I'm the world-famous Bushman for 31 years. What I'm here for is to scare the hell out of you.
Neither Greg nor David were necessarily a liar by nature, it's just that neither of them was incentivized to tell the whole truth.
You calling me a liar?
I ain't calling you a truther.
It's kind of like how many different people claimed they invented the burger. No one wants to be second. It's part of the mystique of the act that you just got scared by the world-famous Bushman.
Oh my God! No, it's Bushman, not God.
And part of maintaining the front that you're the original Bushman is coming up with a convincing story as to how you got the idea to get started.
I was a shoe shine man on Market Street, and I used to decorate my shoe shine stand with a lot of trees and flowers. The guy out of Hirsch Garage gave me some bamboo. I found some bamboo in a garbage can. When I found the bamboo in the garbage can, I put it on like Shaka Zulu. And then when I scared this lady boy, and she flipped out. And then everybody started liking it.
About 26 years ago, 3 o'clock in the morning, I was going into my apartment.
I closed down a couple of bars, I was feeling pretty good.
It was a real foggy night. So when I got home, put the key in the door, the facing had swollen up around my door frame. The facing had swollen up, so I had to bump it to get it to open. So when I bumped the door, some birds flew out of the bushes and scared the living mess out of me. And scared me half to death.
Mind you, I was drunk.
So about 30 minutes later, I was in the shower, taking the shower, and I couldn't stop laughing.
It had to be the funniest thing, you know what I'm saying?
I said, if any of my neighbors seen me or anybody passing by,
it had to be the funniest thing in the world they ever seen. I said, ooh.
So the next day, I got some bushes and I came out here. 25 years later, here I am.
Now clearly, one of them is lying. At different times, both men have claimed that they were performing first and they got the other one in on the act. And this discrepancy is what makes the story so interesting to me. It's a beef cataloged in regional newspapers over decades where neither party had an incentive to tell the full truth, and journalists blind to the feud that was occurring just kept printing their lies. Basically, anyone that only interviewed one Bushman might have published a decent article, but their piece was factually bankrupt when it came to Bushman history. And remember, that history is very important because their act went mainstream right before the 2000 election. It's what inspired the Republican Party to hide a very scary man behind a very stupid bush. While we don't know what exactly caused them to branch off because all the information came from Greg and David, we know it happened sometime between 1999 and 2002. Greg accused David of running off with their money, and David accused Greg of only sticking with him to learn all his tricks before running off and forming a second act. After their separation, they split the Wharf, and neither of them was willing to cede any of their territory. Here's David busking on Pier 33 right next to the Alcatraz ferry. Even though a lot has changed about this spot, that's definitely the same building in the background, and it has the same lineup of fire hydrant, street lamp, street light, and trash can. David probably chose this place as his secondary location because it was far away from Greg and there were a lot of tourists walking by. Greg's territory was a little further west. He liked to sit on this part of Jefferson Street.
Oh! Be a man, be a man, be a man. Put something in the paper! Paper!
You can see the Silver Gallery in the background here. That was on 360 Jefferson. Additionally, you can see the In-N-Out in the background of this interview. Greg probably chose this place as a secondary location because it's next to Hooters. Seriously.
I like to think Greg chose this place for the sole thing that he is a guy and this has got women in it.
He was considered a local luminary. One day, walking out of my store, I was startled, but not surprised to see Greg judging a wet t-shirt contest, staring at the nearby Hooters girls. He paced up and down, taking a good gander, pondering like a man with very grave concerns on his mind. He took his job very, very seriously.
Greg being around here is another set of eyes. He's been in here and helped with, fights.
He's part of our family, and it's gonna be sad when he leaves. I don't know.
But anyways, you might have noticed that when I was talking about their territory, I used the words secondary location. And that's because somehow, some way, they agreed to split time at the spot.
It's beautiful.
The spot is at 235 Jefferson, right outside Tarantino's, and it's almost scientifically designed for the Bushman. Obviously, the Bushman's Act relies on having a steady stream of tourists, but you could find that anywhere on the wharf. The problem is that right after you scare someone, they're not generally inclined to pay you. I mean, you might get a buck or two off them, but the real money is reaped off the crowd that decides to stop what they're doing and watch your act. The problem, of course, is having a whole lot of people gathered around a bush looking at it makes your scare way more obvious. So as your audience and therefore earning potential goes up, your potential to scare people goes down. Them's just the breaks. Unless, of course, you're in the spot. The crowd gathered on this side of the street obviously blocks the sidewalk in front of the passerbys, but because the water's right out there, and this is the only spot you can see the water for a couple blocks, it's easy to dismiss their presence as people just stopping to look at the bay. Additionally, the street is wide enough that massive crowds of people gathering to watch the act on the other side are out of mind, but narrow enough that the Bushman can easily cross it to harvest tips after a good scare.
What a way to make a living.
Another plus about performing in this location is that they could easily be seen from quite a few restaurants, and the people who were entertained during their meal tended to leave the biggest reported tips. The spot provided cover from your back on both sides of the walkway, both from this trash can and this street lamp. Hiding your back from tourists traveling the other way was essential because if people were looking at you hiding behind the bush, it's going to draw the attention of the people in front of the bush. And it has the added benefit of doubling your scare opportunities. The only thing the spot could possibly be missing is an empty planter that a bush could believably grow out of.
Look at here, you ain't got nowhere to grow this tree right here on this bridge. And if you can't see it, it's supposed to get got.
I mean, it's a great point. To this day, science has only been able to find one kind of bush that grows out of concrete. An ambush. The spot is the reason that Greg and David hated each other enough to start multiple fights. Most disagreements were rooted in the fact that while there might have been two Bushmen, there was only one of the spot. But was the spot really important enough to start fights over? I mean, they were just two homeless men hiding behind a bush and scaring people, right? Wrong.
If you really work at it, you can make up to $60,000 a year.
So you mean that you made $60,000?
While this number might seem a little far-fetched for 1999, I've found multiple comments from different sources saying that David rolled up to work every day in an Escalade. And while David's number was consistent, Greg's got bigger every time you asked.
I average about $55,000 a year.
Average about $70,000 a year. Average about 69 to 73,000 a year.
Somehow, Bushman is the only job where wages keep up with productivity. A common reaction to hearing the Bushman's income was telling them to get a real job. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say they did have a real job. They had a business license, a performer's permit, they paid some taxes.
I had to get a business license. I do pay taxes.
Really though, what's the difference between these guys making too much on Wall Street and these guys making too much on Jefferson Street? I mean, they're both managing hedge funds.
Bruh.
While I suspect that David and Greg made the same amount of money, the way they performed was very different. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell who exactly is behind the bush when it's David. He appreciated the subtle detail of the scare. If you had an interaction with David as the Bushman, he probably scared the daylights out of you, and that was it. It doesn't matter if it's David or someone else behind the bush. It's an evergreen routine. The thing you'll remember is that the Bushman scared you. And I think that's how David envisioned the perfect scare. He knew the act wasn't about the bush or the person behind it. It was about the person getting scared and the joy it brought to the crowd watching. Over the years, there were plenty of copycats on the wharf for a very short amount of time, and most people just assumed that they were David because they got scared by a Bushman. This case of mistaken identity was never happening when Greg was behind the bush because he was so different from every other Bushman. And because of the way he acted behind the bush, if you asked any of the locals who the real Bushman was, there was no doubt in their mind.
In my book, Greg is the real Bushman.
He makes people like laugh hysterically. I mean, the things he do, the way he does it, the things he says. Oh.
So why did the locals love him, and why could you always tell it was Greg behind the bush? Because he was a goddamn legend.
I made you holler. Give me a dollar. If I took a picture of your bush, I'll at least give your ass $2. Get in my bush. Take a photo. Take a photo. I'm in the bush with a black man, be honest.
I live here, so I always stop to watch him because he's hysterical. And he's about to scare some people right now.
Oh, God, Jesus. I'm not Jesus Christ. But he was dressed, so I guess you all look alike.
I just play on the situation.
Hey, when the last time you made us scream like that, there?
The thing is that their acts were similar enough that you could mistake them for one another, but different enough that they were incomparable. One worked behind the scenes with the simple goal of scaring people, the other made himself the center of the show. While the Bushmen did fight against each other, they were also fighting the law. Not everyone was able to view the Bushman's antics as a joke. And this is truly one of the best parts of Bushman lore, is there's a Yelp page where people could review the Bushman. And while a vast majority of views were very positive, some were not too keen on the Bushman's continued presence on the wharf.
I average about maybe 10 people a year who actually get mad. Certain times, certain people don't want to be scared, and I understand that.
Of course, it scared the hell out of me. I would get mad too.
Water!
911 wake-up call.
Listen, buddy, you're gonna be wearing this.
I apologize.
I had coffee poured on the hot coffee, zero water. You know, and I take it, you know, that's my job, one of the hazards of my job.
If you ever want to have a good time, just pull up the Bushman's Yelp page and sort by negative. I promise you won't be disappointed.
Watch the Bushman get a swift kick to the balls when he scared someone last weekend. He then complained to the person who kicked him. He's assaulting tourists. The SFPD needs to inflict the sit-lie law on his bush ass.
This guy is a rotten, talentless hack.
I despise the Bushman. He brings out the worst in everyone. Laughing at others, causing fear on several levels, being an asshole, but I laugh. I hate that. Damn you, Bushman. You suck, and I hate that I find it funny.
I once saw him chase down a family of 3 after a little girl took his picture and at 6 years old didn't realize she needed to leave him a tip. He literally took off running after them, bush suit and all, screaming, "If I took a picture of your bush and didn't pay for it, you'd be pissed too."
It just made me mad when he scared my 3-year-old daughter. It's not funny.
All of them are a bunch of bums and the very least entertaining. If he even makes an attempt to do the same act on Matt will guarantee that the Bushman's day as the entertaining figure of Fisherman's Wharf will be his last, because Matt will file a lawsuit and sue him for every penny he's got.
I got slapped pretty hard for laughing and not warning the woman as we approached. Thanks, Bushman. It was worth it.
The SFPD used to chase them away, but 5 or 6 years ago, a jury of their peers set one free after putting a woman in the hospital. When another victim gets taken away in an ambulance, who will speak for them?
One of the most interesting things I found in the reviews is the assertion that the Bushman caused a heart attack, an accusation that is vastly underreported for how widespread it is.
Why don't you ask the cocksucker about the people he's put in the hospital?
Like, I mean, he scared this one woman or man, I'm not sure which one it was, but they had a heart attack and died.
After days of digging down, I couldn't find any official sources to substantiate this claim. The most probable explanation comes from an article in 2002 about growing tensions between the Bushman and the city. It's likely that one of the claims in this article actually led to someone needing an ambulance to the hospital, and that just got twisted around.
You just don't know how many times I've been locked up, beat up, and jumped on by the police and all. The merchants hate me because I spread joy in the world.
Due to an excessive amount of complaints stemming from both business owners and citizens, the DA decided to take the Bushman to court. The trial was a 4-day-long endeavor where the prosecution flew in witnesses, brought in people that David had injured, and tried to convince the public that the Bushman was a menace. In the end, David was found not guilty by a jury of his peers. The DA's office would go on to admit that they got their butts handed to them in court. Believe it or not, this was actually only the first time that this particular DA would fail to hold an old man accountable for being a little creepy.
We did it, Joe.
That's right. If Joey B goes down, we are stuck with someone who has a losing record against shrubbery.
A shrubbery! A what?
While this case did affirm David's right to do his act on the wharf, he did say that it caused him to lay off the children and old people. To this day, David insists that some of the complaints that got him dragged into a courtroom were actually things that Greg did.
He's a lot different than I am.
How so? What do you do differently?
I don't beg. I don't harass people. I don't cuss people out. And he do.
This is not to say that Greg was an angel in all this. He was issued hundreds of fines by the city police that he had to go in front of a judge to get dismissed. After pleading his case, the judge ruled that Greg had good intentions and tore up all his tickets. As they got later into their careers, I think both of them started to understand that there was a line that you just shouldn't cross.
I see Greg probably 5 days a week if he's not in the emergency room.
Just getting up and down off the crate. I mean, I have knee problems. I do have back problems. All my arms get tired because I'm moving back and forth. It's not as easy as it looks.
Greg is mostly sick all the time. He has like not really good health issues, and a lot of people don't notice that because he's like wears this crazy entertaining mask.
Seemed like I saw sparks inside my head when it went off.
How many heart attacks?
That's 8.
This was the 8th one?
That's my 8th one.
Greg's health problems do get on us sometimes because if you don't see him for a couple weeks, you're worried, is that the last time I saw him going to be the last time I saw him?
Greg passed away due to heart complications in February of 2014. While there were a lot of articles written about him in the wake of his death, I think the most touching one comes from Joe Rodriguez. After Joe was forced out of his mother's home at 17, his friend got him a job selling ferry tickets, and he hit the wharf to start selling them. After getting dressed down by multiple buskers, Greg Jacobs, the Bushman, came to the rescue. Greg taught him when and where to stand, how to get on the other buskers' good side, and exactly the best way to sell his ferry tickets. When Joe was chased by Kenny the Clown, Greg stepped in and protected him. When Joe finally got a real job, as he was opening up the store in the morning, Greg snuck up behind him and gave him the scare of his life. This is the first time I've fully believed a piece of media about Greg, mainly because he wasn't interviewed for its creation. Maybe it's foolish to believe the anecdotes about him, but they just line up with everything else I've learned. From his friendship with the Hooters girls, to the way he charmed multiple documentary makers, to his fun-loving demeanor, I've been convinced that there was a genuinely great guy beneath all those leaves. This article, finally being from a primary source that wasn't Greg or David, allowed me to piece together the puzzle and finally figure out who the real Bushman was. David was first. Despite David's claims that he put on the bamboo and he looked like Shaka Zulu, I think it's far more likely that He just saw some branches lying around and decided to have some fun when the shoeshine business got slow. Greg started his reps as the Bushman 6 years after David in 1984. While it's possible that his story about the birds was a lie and that he was inspired by David to start doing the Bushman stuff, it's equally possible that they both started independently. Either way, they were independent until about 1999 because that's when this article mentioned that they'd gotten together recently. We don't know what exactly made them want to work together, but given that the earliest source mentioned that Greg had just taken a break from being a line cook, it kind of suggests that David was already doing the gig full time and Greg stepped in to kind of help him and kind of join the act. David's knowledge of when and where to be that he gained as a shoeshiner likely allowed him to make a lot of money, so it makes sense to me that Greg joined both to protect him and to encourage the crowd to donate. It's likely that we'll never know what caused the two of them to split, but in the wake of Greg's death, David said that the pair had made up their differences. I mean, how can you remain enemies with the one other person crazy enough to turn scaring people as a bush into their life? Now, some of that complete story was speculation, and some of it relied on information from a Bushman, but I kind of choose to believe it because that's just what you have to do. The archives are incomplete. When it comes to Bushman history, you just kind of have to gather the facts as best you can and connect the dots in the way that makes the most believable picture. While other articles were printed around this time telling the public that everything was fine and that the Bushman was still around, make no mistake, Greg's version of the Bushman died with him.
No one will ever be able to do it like that. No one will ever be able to do this.
And watching Greg actually perform made me doubt the question I'd been asking this whole time. I wanted to know which of these two men was the authentic, original, world-famous Bushman. But now I've realized that there are two answers. The fact that David sprang up first cements the idea in my head that he was the original man behind the bush. But Greg was the world-famous Bushman. Following Greg's death, the Yelp reviews that used to roll in year-round started to wane, getting posted sporadically only around the busiest tourist seasons before stopping completely when David retired in 2019. Finding out where David is now is no small task, made more difficult because a lot of news sources mistakenly reported him dead in 2014 because they couldn't tell the difference between the two Bushmen. However, I found two comments, including one by his daughter, that suggest he's no longer with us. But this guy clearly knows something, but is getting basic Bushman facts wrong. Is this lady really his daughter? Or am I getting bamboozled by someone with a YouTube account named Davida Johnson? Did David really pull a Lorelai Gilmore before Lorelai Gilmore? There was a report that David had moved to Florida, but that was revealed to be a separate Bushman. While Greg's death was met with many articles mourning the loss of a homegrown hero, it seems like one day David just decided to pack it up, which is an incredibly David thing to do. You probably noticed that this video was a lot more focused on Greg, and that's because when interviewed, Greg would just talk until you made him stop. At one point, he claimed that he was a professional football player in the WFL on Memphis, which was so comically easy to fact check and disprove that I'm surprised he even said it. David was much more of an answer the question kind of guy. It's kind of like how some athletes go on a full-on retirement tour and some just tweet that they're done.
I'm just here so I won't get fined.
I was actually really curious as to whether David was alive or not, so I reached out to Joe Rodriguez on Instagram, and to my surprise, he got back to me. Joe said, "I seem to remember hearing that David had also passed, but I don't know when or why I know that." Either way, whether David died to little fanfare or just decided he had enough and packed it up one day, this is always how his story was going to end. It was never about him. He only got the name the Bushman because some random person's kid started calling him that in the 90s. That means for at least 10 years, he was working full-time as just a random dude scaring people behind a bush. And I think that's pretty close to how he saw himself. When I tell people the story of these two, their main question is why? Well, their questions start with why. Why did I listen to you? Why am I friends with you? But then they ask, why were they out there for so long? Didn't they have enough money? And the answer is, because they loved it.
28 years. Why?
Scare the hell out of people.
Are you still out here?
Even when I'm at home feeling bad, it's just like I'm not living if I'm just at home watching TV, not I love what I do. I actually do.
He'll be here as long as he can. He's addicted to it. He has to do it. He can't stay away.
Yeah, every time he got out of the hospital, he would come straight out, sit down with his hospital band on. He got back in his spot as if nothing was wrong with him.
Nobody reacts the same way to getting frightened. So it's like a different job, a different movie every day. I never get tired of it.
I spread joy in the world, but I'm gonna continue to pat dirt in my eyes before I quit. Bushman gonna carry on forever and a day.
What do you like most about being a Bushman?
Scaring the hell out of people. That's the best part I like about it.
Down here, people are normally on vacation. They come to enjoy themselves. So this is something that's very funny, I think, and most of the people see it. That's why I chose Fisherman's Wharf.
The only time I saw the Bushman in person, it was during my first trip to San Francisco with my family. I was probably 8 or 9, and he gave me the biggest scare of my life. And after that, we stopped and watched him work for probably 30 minutes, laughing at his act, genuinely having the greatest time just watching him scare people. I couldn't tell you if we were watching Greg or David, but I can tell you that the Bushman made us laugh until we couldn't feel our sides. And when we got home, we told everyone who would listen about the weird hilarity that was the San Francisco Bushman. All of this has inspired me to do something I've wanted to do for a long, long time. Like, ever since I visited San Francisco as a kid. The only question is, where do I find an unsuspecting victim in a stupid bush?
Ooga booga. If I got you terrified, you must subscribe.
Actually, on second thought, let's leave this one to Greg. So that's the whole story of the Bushman of San Francisco. Because you liked it so much, I can guarantee you love this video I made about Alana Cho, who's basically the polar opposite of a Bushman. She's basically a clout goblin that's responsible for the worst TikTok of all time, and that is not an exaggeration. But the story behind why she chose to publish the worst video I've suffered through in my entire life is just as fascinating as the story you've just enjoyed. So click here right now for more fun times.
Would you like to hear Uncle's favorite tea joke?
Sure, I like jokes. Bring it.
Okay, well, I can't remember how it starts, but the punchline is, leave me alone, I'm bushed. Well, it's funnier when Uncle tells it.